Nathan, are we live?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Dynasty Dudez Hangout with myself, Nathan Powell, and my friend Russell Clay. And our special guest today is Football Guys writer Adam Harstad. How's it going tonight, fellas?
Pretty solid. I'm on the third day of my no food diet, which is just protein. Well, salads and protein. It's working pretty awesome so far. And that's all I got. That's what's going on with me. What about you, Adam?
I'm on day, I don't know, lots of thousands of my food diet, where I eat lots of food.
Wow, that's a savage response to mine. Now I'm gonna go to Burger King after this.
Join the dark side. We've got cookies.
Yeah, definitely missing those. We'll see how long this lasts, but I'm getting some good results so far, so I might stay with it. We'll see.
Well, also featured for those who are watching the Hangout version, Russell and I are wearing our newly minted DLF shirts. The partners up in the sky sent us shirts, so we've been rocking them, and all the women flock to me whenever I'm wearing a DLF shirt.
Yeah, I wore one to the gym today, and I got at least 0 numbers, but yeah.
See, they probably just don't know what DLF stands for. Otherwise, they'd probably be all over that.
Right. If I sat them down and explained them what it is and how cool I am to be a part of it, then you're probably right. But
yeah, no, you don't understand. You see, in April, we sit around and we talk about football. In April, though.
All right. We'll get into the content of the show. We got a couple news and notes. The biggest news of the week was Johnny Manziel, after entering rehab back in January, I believe, it might have been February. He was released from rehab this week. So, how is this a good thing that it took him 2-3 months to get out of rehab? I'm not a psychologist, but what are our thoughts on Manziel coming out of rehab this week?
You can go first, Adam.
I'm always wary. Players have their public persona, and there's a lot of what anybody does is public relations. And I wonder, did Johnny Manziel think that he had a problem, or did Johnny Manziel recognize that the public thinks he has a problem, and so Johnny Manziel entered rehab to rehabilitate his public perception? If he's got a problem, then I think it's good that he stayed in rehab, and that's awesome, as long as he recognizes that he has a problem, and that's the reason he went. If he doesn't have a problem, or if he does have a problem but doesn't recognize that and he just went in for the public relations benefit of it, then I don't think we're going to see much good come of it.
And he's already teetering on the bust label after 1 year. I mean, when he went in there, it was just so clear he was totally unprepared. So, I mean, I hope so. I thought he had a chance to be decent out of college. I mean, what would we buy him for right now? Like, would you even pay a third for him right now?
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
You would?
Yeah, partly because I think it's insane to be writing a guy off after, basically half a season of work. Just wash our hands of him. We're done with him. I know there's all this stuff going on outside the field, but you look at guys like Joey Harrington got 3 shots. And I know that Joey Harrington didn't have the character risk, and Joey Harrington is a concert pianist.
What?
You didn't know that? Joey Harrington's a concert pianist.
Wow. Talk about a dual threat.
I know, absolutely. Which I'm sure made teams much more willing to take a chance on him as a football player. But how many times have we seen guys struggle early in their career and turn it around? And the thing with Johnny Manziel is he doesn't have to be a good quarterback to be a good fantasy quarterback, because he can run. And we've seen bad quarterbacks be good fantasy quarterbacks. Tim Tebow was not an NFL quarterback, and Tim Tebow was a top 12 fantasy option. Vince Young was a top 12 fantasy option.
Tim Tebow might have pushed people into a few fantasy championship games. That year he was awesome for a 4 or 5 week stretch. And then he
Yeah,
had
I
one.
think there were like 300-yard rushing games by a quarterback that year, and I think 2 of them were Tebow.
Yeah, it was
Yeah, the
nuts.
thing with that is the Tebow comp is that Tebow was a church boy, and he still was out of the league in 2 years. So thinking that Manziel's in the league in 2 or 3 years is kind of a reach at this point.
I mean, I think unless you're a Jamarcus Russell who just eats himself out of the league, I think there's plenty of opportunities for a first round pick, and obviously we'll get into that later. But we've seen time and again that these first round picks that probably don't deserve another chance get another chance anyway. So even if it doesn't work out with the Browns, I think we might see him get a shot somewhere else.
And the other thing too is whether it's a 1 quarterback league or 2 quarterback league changes the dynamic. Because in a 1 quarterback league, if your quarterback busts, you can get, quality starting production for nothing. A guy like Alex Smith costs a firm handshake, maybe half-eaten ham sandwich, and he'll get you some numbers. He'll help carry you. Your team isn't completely sunk if you're starting Alex Smith or Carson Palmer. So when I'm looking at quarterbacks in a 1 quarterback league, all I'm asking is there a chance that this is a top 5 difference maker? And if there's not a chance, I'm not interested in buying him because I can get non-difference makers for nothing. And if there is a chance, I don't really care if there's a bust risk because if he blows up and just is out of the league in 2 years, okay, well then I roll out Alex Smith or Carson Palmer.
Right. And I think there's always going to be that market for like old vets that you can sort of get before the season for cheap, and you can sort of just patchwork a season of quarterback production together. But I mean, back to Manziel, I think he's worth a shot. If he has the rushing ability, so there's points right there automatically if he starts. So yeah. I guess a third. I probably wouldn't pay more than that.
But in like a recent DLF startup mock, I picked him in the 20th round, and there it's like, okay, the 20th round.
Yeah.
I'll pick any first round NFL pick.
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. And unless he's in the 20th round, I'm not touching him. But we'll move on from Manziel for now. We'll probably circle back that way when we're talking about other stuff. But the Roto World blurb of the week that made everyone laugh out loud was the Titans see Zach Mettenberger as a poor man's Tom Brady. Okay, I think are we all in agreement that Zach Mettenberger is not a poor man's Tom Brady?
Yeah, and I'm not even sure how to evaluate what does that even mean? And why are you calling your own players like a poor man's version of something? Like that's just weird to me. But I don't know. That's sort of my take on it.
Yeah, I think if you get poor enough, I mean, I'm a poor man's Tom Brady. Like I'm like an absolute destitute man, living in a cardboard box, eating a crust of breads, man. Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we'll hit on I don't know that So with the Titans, do we think that this is some way of saying, okay, is it a smoke screen, or is it saying that they don't want a quarterback? And what does this mean for the Titans offense, you think, with their quarterback situation? There's guys like Justin Hunter, who some people have faith in, and Kendall Wright.
Kendall Wright.
And Delaney Walker is probably my favorite player on that offense.
I do think there's potential with these receivers. With Mettenberger, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I'm still not sure he's an NFL quarterback. I think they'd be crazy to pass on one, but it sort of felt like throughout the offseason, even like before the draft rolled around, they were sort of intent on like giving him a shot. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I kind of think it's something you have to say. I don't think you can come out in the media before the draft and be like, our quarterback's a bum. Of course we're going to be getting somebody. You could say, oh, well, we believe in competition and we're going to bring in some competition. But there's really nothing else they can say. And whenever a team says something that is really the only thing they can say, I don't pay much attention to it. Like, they're not going to come out and be like, our guy's terrible. They're not going to come out and be like, oh, our guy's a superstar. So they come up with this carefully couched, carefully crafted rhetoric, which basically tells us nothing.
True.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm not sure whether it was Russell or Adam, but one of you has a barking dog.
That is me. He was going off. Whenever a person walks by, he just has to let them know that he is there. That's the small dog syndrome, though. Like
Yeah,
that's
as
what they
long as
do.
there's like a window between them, they are the biggest, toughest
Yeah, it's
guys on the
unbelievable.
block.
All right, so we'll get into the bulk of the show here. Adam, talk about yourself a little bit. I know that's something you probably hate doing, but just talk about yourself as a writer, as a Dynasty player. Just kind of broad stroking this, but go ahead, talk about yourself.
Okay. I am Scorpio. I like long walks on the. I'm actually not a Scorpio. I don't even know what I am.
Oh, dude, come on! I thought we had something in common for a second. I was like,
Uh,
wow.
I'm whatever the person who doesn't know what their astrological sign is. Um, no, I've been doing Dynasty since 2007. Been doing fantasy in general since I guess 2001. I think is when I first started dabbling my toes. Um, and I had an old league that I was doing. That the first guys I started a league with back in 2001. Around 2004, 2005, I'm like, this is kind of fun. You guys want to try Keeper? And they're like, yeah, sure. And then around 2007, I'm like, yeah, the Keeper League's pretty fun. You guys want to try Dynasty? And they're like, yeah, sure. And so it's just been the same core group of guys for almost 15 years now. I mean, some of them I've actually known longer than I've known my wife.
Wow, so
Um,
you're in the same like dynasty league you started that way back when?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My 2007 league. That's and typically when I talk about
Wow.
my dynasty team, that's the team I'm talking about because I mean I've been. It's the same group of guys as forever. That's my team. That's the one where I
Yes.
identify with that one. The losses in that league. If I win that league and come in dead last in every other league, it was a fantastic season. Like that's the league.
It really is how it goes, because in a perfect world, you would value all your leagues evenly, but there's always going to be like one or two that are like, that's the one I care about the most. I don't really care. If I win that one, I could lose the rest of them and still be fine.
It's like parents. You know, everybody says, "Oh, I love all my children equally." But that's a lie. Everybody has favorite kids. Come on.
You just got to keep it under wraps till they're like 18, so you don't like
Yeah.
star them, and then
And then you sit him down and you're like, you're a man now. It's time for you to know. I like your brother more than you.
and this shouldn't be traumatic anymore. So and now you've got to get out. So I'll see you later.
Yeah.
So, Adam, you talk a lot about trading in the market on Twitter. How do you approach trading in Dynasty Leagues?
I do a lot of it. And actually, I was looking at so my dynasty team, that oldest one, the one that's been around since 2007. I was looking at the roster. It's a 30-man roster, and of the 30, there's actually 31 players on my team right now because we haven't taken people off IR yet. So of the 31 players on my team, there are 4 players that I drafted, and I've held continuously since. I drafted Roethlisberger in the startup in 2007. I drafted Jonathan Stewart in 2008, and nobody's ever offered anything even remotely close to fair value for him. And then last year I drafted Mike Evans and Jace Amaro, and those are the only 4 players on my entire team that I drafted. And it's not because I draft badly. I've drafted Demaryius Thomas. I've drafted Le'Veon Bell. It's just that I'm always working on trades. I'm always turning over everybody. Demaryius is actually an interesting. So I drafted Demaryius, and then I traded him to another owner, and then that owner traded him to another owner, and then I traded back for Demaryius, and then I traded him back to that first owner that I originally traded him to. And he's kind of, they're all big trades. It's not like anybody's ripping anything off. But my philosophy is, if I think I'm an above average trader and I think I can make like a 5 or 10% profit on every trade, like a 10% profit's nothing. But if I string together like 8, 9 trades in a row and I'm averaging a 10% return every time, I mean, I just doubled my value.
Right, and I think I just had bad experiences early on in dynasty leagues, and that's sort of like it shifted the way I do things now, where like we'll do the startup, or I'll do a startup. Say I did one this year, and I will just try really hard during the startup to get the players that I want, and then I just sort of sit on the roster. And then say like last year, Brian Quick was one of the guys that I really wanted to get in the later rounds. And then once he sort of had a few good games, I was like, okay, I'm selling you for a future first. that's sort of the only time I've really like trade now, unless there's something going on in the league where I'm trying to win now or something like that. But I don't know if I'm just scarred from past experiences or it's just not part of my strategy. But I don't know. That's an interesting way to think about it. I guess I just need to get more confident in the trading mode. But
two quick things. One is if you want to talk about traumatic experiences, if you trade a lot, you're going to get some awful, awful trades. And so last year, I traded for Keenan Allen, Cordero Patterson, Michael Floyd, and Ladarius Green, all in one go. And to get them, I gave up Le'Veon Bell, Randall Cobb, Julius Thomas, and a late first-round pick that, according to my rankings, would have been Odell Beckham.
Oh, no.
I know. So, that's the thing. I say that I can expect to make a 5 or 10% profit, but that's not every trade is a 5 or 10% profit. There's some where it's just complete bust, go back home, like never trade again, cry in your room sort of thing. Right. And then there's some where it's like a home run. I traded Josh Freeman and a late first for Adrian Peterson after his ACL tear, and then I had him for that 2012 season. And I won a championship because I traded basically Josh Freeman and a late first for Peterson.
Right, and I get the process over sort of just looking at the one result and then getting scared away. But I think early in my career, one of the biggest mistakes I made was just trading to trade, not necessarily trying to get that profit is where I was at, and I just loved trading. So like every time someone would start proposing back and forth with you, you kind of get into it and you're like, well, I got to end with a deal here, and I sort of like this guy, but that's the biggest thing I would suggest people stay away from when you're trading. Because, I mean, there are productive trades that work out for everyone, but when you're consistently trading and just for, like, fun, make it a cheap league or make sure you know what you're doing, basically.
Yeah, high volume trading is great if you're turning a profit. If you're getting that 5% gain every time, then you want to do a ton of trades. But if you're getting like a 2% loss and you trade 1,000 times, you just decimated your roster just one little chip away at a time just because you're trading for trading.
Yeah. And okay, go ahead.
I was going to chip in. You guys were, talking for 20 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
For me, I feel like I never have the 5% trades. I have the ones where I like win by 80% or lose by 80%. And so it's just like anytime I have a huge loss, I'm like, okay, I got to figure out how to make up that 80%. And thankfully it works out sometimes, but obviously there are sometimes that it doesn't.
Yeah, and the one sort of way I found to like alleviate like getting totally destroyed in a trade is getting those future picks. Yeah. It's like every time I get one of those, I have a chance to, even if I lose the trade, I have a chance to sort of recoup some of what I lost. So that's sort of how I got big into the trading for future first thing. And
the nice thing about future firsts is you can kind of rent them out and you can live on the income from that. So in my old league, I've had 4 or more first rounders at one point in another in each of the last 5 drafts. And I'm not using 4 first-round picks every year. I'll just accumulate them, and then I'll trade this year's first for next year's first and a little bit extra. And if you keep doing that every year, you get to pocket that little bit extra every time. And they're basically paying a tax on their impatience. And that's, it's sustainable. It's a great way to keep a good team good when the natural pick system is designed to bring those good teams back to the pack.
Right.
All right, so one of the biggest topics, especially at this point in the offseason, is when people are talking about trading their studs, their A.J. Greens, their Des Bryants, their Demaryius Thomases. How do you value the difference between a stud and a larger volume of unknown guys that you think have the potential to become a stud?
And this is where I got in trouble. Because, like, I was, like, 20, thought I was the big kid on the block, and like, oh, I'll just trade, like, I don't know, Des Bryant right now, for example, for like 3 young guys and like a pick, and like I'll be fine, and like it would work out. But sort of what I've learned throughout the years is almost every time, like the bulk of those guys, you may hit on someone, but they don't necessarily equal to what that one stud brings you each week. You know? What do you think, Adam?
That's one that I've looked at a lot in the past because as a guy who routinely has 4 or 5 first rounders, I mean, I naturally get a lot of people who are approaching and they're like, I will give you Calvin Johnson for all of your first round picks. And so for me, it's not the question, how many first round picks is a stud worth, isn't just an academic question. I mean, to me, that's a practical one that I have to work on every year. And I've looked at it a lot, and I've used several different approaches. And what it always comes down to for me is historically a top tier, like a top 5 overall dynasty player, is usually worth about 3.5 future first round draft picks. Now, this is with the caveat that they're truly random first round draft picks. Like, I'm not going to trade Des Bryant for the 10th, 11th, 12th pick in the first round because that's not 3.5 random ones. But a perfectly random one, you know, there's a chance that you're getting a top 3 pick, and those things they're basically money. They're worth their weight in gold. There's a chance you're going to strike out and get some late picks, but even those still have some value. And the key thing to remember is, so let's say you trade a 27-year-old Calvin Johnson for a first-round pick that you use on a guy who becomes the next Calvin Johnson, you know, the 22-year-old Calvin Johnson. The rookie guy is worth more than the 27-year-old guy because you still have all that 22 to 27 value as well. You know, if you trade a guy whose career is half over for a guy who's just as good, whose career is just started, then the just as good guy should be worth twice as much. So when you're trading for a whole bunch of picks, I mean, it's not necessary that you hit on all of them, and people look at the miss rate on picks. It's just if you get enough swings at the ball, if you get enough pitches over the plate, eventually you're going to hit a home run. And for me, I found that 3.5 swings at the plate is typically what I need, which means if I'm selling a guy, I want to get 4 in return, and if I'm buying a guy, I'm willing to give 3 to get him.
Right, and I mean, obviously some draft classes are going to be better than others, so there's going to be more hits in some than others, but I from my experience, that's pretty much what I see as well. And I think even if you don't necessarily hit, there's a huge window to sell in that second year, that second off season. For like, I mean, last off season it was, I thought Keenan Allen was at a sell high. My issue was that I didn't get full value for what I should have gotten. But yeah, there are certain guys like that where even if you don't necessarily hit on their entire career, there's still a window to sell high. So.
All right, so we were talking about differences in classes. This is actually something I want to talk about with Adam. So do you essentially value every single 101 fairly equal, or is it on what you think of that year? Let's say this year the 101 is Todd Gurley, and then when Mark Ingram came out, he was your 101, but you thought Gurley was clearly the better prospect. Does that mean you value the 101 more, or is it more of like, okay, the 101 is worth the 101?
Well, I don't do a lot of scouting. I don't actually watch any college football at all. And I got a lot of respect for guys like you who are actually watching the tape and forming your own opinions, because a lot of times I'm just piggybacking off of what other people are doing. And that's why I follow guys like you on Twitter, so that I can copy off your homework.
Yeah, that's fine.
But a lot of it is, I think draft position is big, and so Mark Ingram, if in a year he's the guy who's the consensus 101, and actually, you know, I preferred Green and Julio that year because they were top 10 draft picks. But if Ingram's your 101, he's a late first round NFL pick, and so I'm going to prefer, say, like a Trent Richardson, who's a very early first round NFL pick. So to some extent, yeah, it's going to vary year to year based on where people are drafted. And then to another extent, but yeah, like so Sammy Watkins was number 4 overall. If Amari Cooper goes number 4 overall this year, I'm not going to view them as meaningfully different prospects. I'm going to view Amari Cooper this year as worth about as much as Sammy Watkins last year.
That would have been the better comp. I should have used that one.
But so the bigger thing is, when I'm projecting out into the future, it's hard for me to know what a draft class is going to look like in advance. So from that perspective, I typically assume there's going to be a top tier of rookies every year. And sometimes the top tier is two players. You know, in the Peterson Calvin Johnson draft, those two were pretty clearly ahead of the pack, and then Marshawn Lynch was like a half tier behind, and then everybody else was just nowhere near them. Sometimes you have bigger top tiers. Sometimes you don't really have a top tier. In the Gio Bernard, Le'Veon Bell, Tavon Austin draft, there wasn't really a top tier. There were kind of guys who had to be at the top, but there weren't really any sterling prospects in that. But when I'm projecting in the future, I just assume that the top tier is going to be the top tier. You know, there's going to be a top tier, and those guys are more or less going to be worth what the top tier guys were worth in years past.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's more hype surrounding different years. Like I'd say, like for instance, when Noshawn Moreno was coming out, I don't think he was even close to the hype that, say, a Trent Richardson or a Todd Gurley would be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he still went 101, right?
Yeah, Moreno was the 101 that year. Beanie Wells, I think, was the 102, and they were viewed as the top tier. And then you had Donald Brown and LaShawn McCoy and I think Michael Crabtree. There was some Percy Harvin hype at the time, but I think that's about how that draft shook out.
And I mean, like, hype will grow as the summer goes on, and even like in 2013, when there was clearly no top guys. I mean, Le'Veon's a top guy now, but he wasn't viewed as that type of prospect. But then, like, that class was totally different than most of the other classes. Like, even going into it, you kind of knew it was a lot weaker than most years, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then looking back 2 years, pretty much like the only ones that have like major value right now are Le'Veon, Gio, and Hopkins.
Yeah.
Pretty much has their own concerns or just are terrible, one of the two.
So, and this draft position thing is like, within the last 3 years, it's sort of what I've really started to focus on. And that's why, even though I do watch a lot of players, like, I'm not making rankings before the draft this year. Like, there's no way. That's how, like, I'm so mad at myself for missing on Odell Beckham last year. Because if I had just waited till after the draft to make my rankings, I mean, he went 12th. Like, I would have had him rated so much higher. But last year I was so cemented in all my views before the draft even happened that I just, even though he went 12th, I bumped him up, but not enough. So that's definitely something I'm going to be watching for this year, you know?
And my thoughts on that are, you know, like, I follow you guys, I watch what you do. I know you put a lot of time and effort into watching the prospects, and I have a lot of respect for your process. But you have to remember, too, that it's not like NFL teams are just flying blind. They're basically hiring guys like you full-time, who that's all they're doing all day, every day,
Right.
is grinding tape and making opinions. And I think a lot of times you might be more right than any individual scout, but you're getting a whole collection of scouts getting together, sharing their ideas. It's not really that revolutionary to say, like, okay, yeah, they might know what they're doing. They might have a pretty good idea about what makes players good in the NFL.
And that's where I'm at, like, okay, why not take this huge, time-consuming, like, $1 million research that they're using and sort of just take it and put it into your rankings, you know?
I call it cheating off of their homework. You know, they're doing all the hard work, and then I get to peek over their shoulder and say, oh, that's what you thought of Odell Beckham.
And they know tons of stuff that we'll never know personally about the players, and just like way deeper than we could ever see on the field. So that's one of the main reasons I definitely take it way more into account now than I used to.
Yeah, and one thing that Russell has brought onto the show, and essentially with like some seventh round and like undrafted guys who start getting hype on Twitter, he has his couldn't care less island.
I'm actually retiring it. It's not good for marketing purposes. But yes, I still am fully in on the concept of
okay, I'll explain.
Right.
Where essentially he talks about a player that everyone's getting hyped about, and he's like, you know what, I'm not wasting my time with it. And most of the time it's because they don't have the pedigree. They aren't first round picks. They're just guys that, okay, we're liking today and we'll forget about tomorrow. and then sometimes they become Charles Johnson.
And a lot of it is those fringe guys, they're the ones who are most interesting to talk about because they're the ones we know the least about. I mean, they're the ones where there's the most room for different opinions. So a lot of times they get a lot of people talking about them just because there's stuff to say. Like, what is there to say about Mike Evans that hasn't already been said? We know who he is. We know he's talented. We know he had a fantastic rookie season. You know, we can quibble on, okay, is he your number 1 dynasty receiver or your number 6 or whatever? But, you know, it's everybody's in broad agreement and they're just quibbling over little details. Whereas somebody like Charles Johnson, you know, like some people are going to love him, some people are going to hate him. So it's a lot easier to talk about those guys. On the Football Guys message board, they have a Dynasty thread. I always call it the Dynasty Super Thread. It got started back in 06 or 07. It's like 500 pages long at this point. And it's basically a time capsule. You can go back to a previous date and time and see what people were talking about and see what people thought. And it's really depressing because 80% of the posts are over guys who, like, didn't matter. They just flat out didn't matter. People are spilling so much ink over Beanie Wells, you know, or they're going crazy over Fendi Onabon, the tight end for the St. Louis Rams, who had ridiculous workout scores. Looking back, it feels like it was just such a waste of time. Although obviously, you know, you enjoy it, and even if that particular player doesn't pan out, you're still getting stuff out of it.
And it's not even necessarily that I think these players are bad. They just have such a tougher mountain to climb to get a legitimate opportunity that I just like. Josh Hill could be great, but the odds that even if he performs well, that he actually like somehow gets a job, or Jason Hill for the Saints?
It's Josh Hill.
Oh, okay. See, I messed it up when I put him on the island. I said Jason Hill. But yeah, like the point is, like, it's not that I don't like Josh Hill. Okay, we're moving on. We're gonna talk about Jeff Janis because he's a perfect example.
Yeah.
I would never I don't think Jeff Janis is a bad player. It's just he has such a tough way to get opportunity that I just don't see it as very likely. He could be a good player, and that's fine, but he's going to have to really shine and outperform a lot of players who have more equity to sort of get an opportunity.
Yeah, so Adam, what are you doing with your 29th and 30th roster spots? Are you focusing on guys that went in the early rounds that have busted hugely, or what are you doing with those roster spots?
I think I was actually just about to talk about that. I think Jeff Janis is the perfect kind of guy for those spots. Basically, if I've got 30 roster spots, I've got 28 guys who I love and they're on my roster. Like, that's it. They're part of my team. And the last 2 guys, I'm just churning through like mad. You know, I might turn over. They might be on my roster for 2 weeks. I like to talk about something called urgency, which is there's definitely going to be some new information coming in about this player in the next couple weeks. And I like devoting those guys to, okay, so if a starting running back gets hurt and there's a backup behind him who I think probably sucks, but I'm going to find out for sure in the next couple weeks. I'm going to add him and watch him for those 2 weeks, and if he pans out, he might make my core 28, and if he doesn't, then I'm just going to cut him loose into the wind. And so a lot of times there are a bunch of guys who will be on my team for a week or 2 at a time just because I want to see what he does that week. And Janis is a perfect example of that. I might pick up and drop Janis 3 or 4 times during the year, depending on who else is on the street and who else is on the end of my roster. And it's all just a goal to be the one holding him if and when he breaks out.
I definitely agree with that. If you could get him and put him on your last spot. But what I disagree with is sort of selling actual, valued parts of your team to get a player like that is where I start to, really refrain from buying into the hype. Now, okay, so this is one of the things I wanted to get into. What do you think about an Aaron Dobson, who has shown, absolutely nothing? He showed a little bit his rookie year, but then he's obviously been hurt the whole time, and now he's entering year 3 with what is perceived as no possible role. So, what are your thoughts on him? Would you take a late-round flyer on him, or are you pretty much avoiding?
He's another. I view him pretty similar to Jeff Janis. You know, I think they're probably pretty close in value. And so I do rankings for football guys, but I don't really like the ranking mindset. I kind of view it more. I'm good ranking like 30 deep, and then after that, you kind of just get buckets of featureless players who are all pretty similar. And my thought is, I want whoever in that bucket is the cheapest. And if anybody in that bucket starts to get a little bit of hype going, I'll gladly sell him for somebody else in that bucket plus a little bit extra. I view like wide receiver, you go about 30 deep, and then you just enter like a big tier of probably 10 to 15 young, talented guys with some upside. Your prospects with upside bucket. And if Aaron Dobson is the hot name of the day, I'll sell Aaron Dobson and pick up somebody else in that bucket instead. And if Aaron Dobson is somebody nobody's even looking at, then I'll grab Aaron Dobson and hold him, and maybe if he becomes hot later, I'll trade him. But I'm just looking at, and especially in roster construction, I always want to have a couple young receivers with upside, and it's basically whoever I can get for the cheapest.
Yeah, that makes sense. My opinion on Dobson is I was never really a fan coming out when he got on the Patriots. I've never really seen it.
Neither have I.
So would you rather Aaron Dobson or Jeff Janis?
I'd rather Dobson. Oh, sorry.
Okay. I mean, I'd rather have Janis just because there is a cult following to Janis. Like, I sold Janis for Blackman this week, and I was just like,
crazy.
What?
Straight up.
Really?
Yeah. He has a cult following. So
well, maybe I like Jeff Janis better. Wow,
But that's exactly what I'm talking about. To me, there's not really a fundamental value difference between Aaron Dobson and Jeff Janis. And so if I own one of them and all of a sudden they get a cult following and people are going nuts over them, like, absolutely I'm going to sell. I'm not going to turn down any reasonable offers for these guys because I'm not attached to any specific single one of them.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I've learned as well. Like, I've sort of detached myself from all these players, and yeah, I like some more than others, but once someone gets overvalued, they're overvalued. And once someone's in the 19th round of a startup, like, I really didn't like Aaron Dobson last year because he was going in the 9th round of a startup, but
all right, yeah.
But now he's like 19th round, sure. Like, I'll just put him on my roster. I don't really care.
Yeah, if 4 of my 30 players are guys I've actually drafted myself, obviously I'm not one on emotional attachments.
Yeah.
I'm cutthroat. Anybody's ready to go for the right price. I mean, if I'm not selling them, it's because you haven't come with the right price yet.
All right, so we'll talk a little bit about. I feel like everyone on every podcast talks about this guy, but Calvin Johnson, his value, I guess, this offseason has been really interesting. It's definitely dropped, and there are some people that think the drop is valid, and there are some people that think, how on earth are you letting Calvin Johnson fall out of the first round? Are you in either of those camps or somewhere in the middle, Adam?
Well, if we had a perfect crystal ball, I mean, if we knew, or like in Back to the Future, where he gets that sports almanac from the future and he knows exactly how every player is going to perform, if we had that and we look at player value, what it's going to be is the player value is going to be at the absolute highest early in his career because his entire career is in front of him, and it's just going to slowly and steadily decline from there, not necessarily because the player is getting worse, but just because there's fewer fantasy points left in the future. You don't get credit for stuff that happens in the past. So to that extent, Calvin Johnson's going to decline in value, and it's not because we don't love Calvin Johnson. It's not because we think he's getting worse as a player. It's just there's fewer fantasy points left in his future. There's more fantasy points now in his past. So I don't have any sentimental attachment to him. I would not have him as my number 1 dynasty receiver this year. I did have him there last year. I don't think he had a bad season, but he's another year older. That's another year value behind him, and some of the guys behind him also had great seasons. At 29, he's not done. He's not even close to done. I think he's going to be a Hall of Fame receiver. I think he's probably going to age pretty well. But Torrey Holt, I thought was going to age fantastically. He had the NFL record for receiving yards per game for his career through age 30, and then he just kind of developed a degenerative knee condition, and within a couple years he's playing in Jacksonville and then out of the league. So you never know what's going to happen, and there's always a risk when you're taking an older player that the unforeseen can happen and his career will end sooner than you think. So I guess this is really just a long-winded way of straddling the fence and saying, no, I don't think he's done. But at the same time, no, I'm not drafting him where I would have drafted him a year ago.
I think there's once you hit that 30 age, like you said, it becomes a very volatile prospect. And so say like Andre Johnson, I believe in his 30th, when he turned 30, he got hurt and he only had like 400 yards that year. And his value just tanked. And it never fully recovered. But then in his age 31 and 32 year, he had like 1,600 and 1,400 yards. So I don't think in terms of value you're ever going to get the return on Calvin Johnson. I think he's sort of heading into that range where he's much more valuable on your roster than he is in a trade. But one quick question. In 2007, what was the hype around him? Was he like hyped as the best? I know he went, number 2 overall. Was he hyped as like, was that the most hyped you've ever seen a receiver?
Yeah, he was not the most hype I've ever seen a receiver. He was pretty much viewed as the perfect wide receiver prospect. Squeaky clean character, basically unheard of measurables, fantastic college production. There was a little bit of question coming out of Georgia Tech about how that would translate to the NFL because obviously, Georgia Tech did not have a very modern passing attack. Yeah. Was it Reggie Ball was the quarterback who was just terrible? He was so awful. But a lot of people viewed that as a positive too because they're like, Calvin's producing with him. Like, there's nobody that bad in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So he was viewed pretty much as the perfect receiver prospect. I think Larry Fitzgerald and Charles Rogers probably had a comparable amount of hype, maybe a little bit less. Maybe Calvin was held up a little bit above Fitzgerald. I think Charles Rogers was viewed as the better prospect coming in. But yeah, he was squeaky clean, and people were, if you could get a top 2 dynasty pick that year, there was legitimate debate. Adrian Peterson was viewed as the best running back prospect possibly ever, and there was legitimate debate about whether you wanted him or Calvin Johnson at the 1.01.
So there's a scenario where it actually worked out.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think Trent Richardson has even like jaded me a little bit, where I love Todd Gurley, but I mean he got that injury, and now I'm a little. I still love him. I still think he's an elite prospect. I still think he's going to have many years of great production. But there's that little thing in my head saying, oh, God, please don't bust.
Yeah, so going back to Calvin and AP for just a second. So something I always wonder about in rookie drafts and in startups too is the value of an RB 1 year versus the value of a wide receiver 1 year. If knowing what we know now, let's say AP doesn't get suspended last year, he has a normal RB 1 year. Would you rather have AP's career or Calvin's career on your dynasty roster from 2007 through today and in the future?
Part of it gets to PPR, and I'm pretty vocal on Twitter that I don't think PPR is really a scoring system for dynasty leagues because PPR was invented around the year 2000 because redraft leagues, basically the top 12 picks would all be running backs. It's just running back, running back, running back, running back, running back. So they invented PPR to make wide receivers worth roughly as much as running backs from year to year. But in Dynasty, you don't want wide receivers to be worth as much as running backs every year because wide receivers' careers last 50% longer, wide receivers are less prone to injury, wide receivers are more consistent from year to year. So if they're worth as much as a running back every single year, then they're worth dramatically more than a running back over the course of their careers. So in PPR, when you get a Hall of Fame wide receiver, that's pretty much going to be the most valuable piece you can possibly own. In Standard, I would have preferred Peterson, just because the single-year value of a top running back in Standard leagues is just impossible to match, and that's why you were getting the top 12 picks in redraft leagues being running backs, because if a running back hits, you're one of the top 3 teams in the league. So in PPR, I would lean Calvin. In Standard, I would lean Adrian Peterson. My favorite format's actually yardage heavy. because it helps mitigate the random touchdown fluctuations. So in my league, my old one, players get a point for every 5 yards instead of a point for every 10. And in that, I would lean slightly to Adrian Peterson again, just because it's nice concentrating all that value into a single year and improving your championship odds by that much more in a single year. And then if his career is shorter or whatever and your team gets worse, well, then you can play for high rookie picks instead.
And sadly, I don't think the NFL, I don't know that we'll ever see running backs get the sort of volume we saw in the past. I'm not sure we're ever going to see what LT did in the mid to early 2000s. I'm not sure. I'm optimistic that this class is going to bring the running back position sort of back to relevance, but I'm not sure we're ever going to see that ceiling again.
And I think a lot of people don't understand the historical context to running back usage. I think a lot of people got into fantasy in the early 2000s, and so how things were then, people assume that's how things have been. That was the normal state of affairs. But if you look at it, running back workloads from 2000 to 2005 were historically high. I mean, just huge. People talk about, this running back by committee trend is a new thing, but it's not. O.J. Simpson, when he had his 2,000 rushing yards, he got 60 or 65% of the carries for the Bills. That was just the standard state of affairs. Everybody was splitting carries. Jim Brown was splitting carries. Basically everybody but Eric Dickerson was splitting carries.
Wow. Okay.
So when we move into the Tomlinson, the Priest Holmes, the Clinton Portis, that was actually the aberration. And the move now towards more of these committees like Hill and Bernard, that's actually more historically the stable state for the NFL. That's how things have been.
That's interesting.
One of the more another interesting thing that I see you talk about a lot is the difference between a risk of injury or a risk of suspension. You've always said that someone's more likely to be resuspended than re-injured. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But so are you buying or selling Gordon and Blackman in Dynasty at their current prices?
In my oldest Dynasty league, because his price was free, he got cut, and absolutely, I'm all over that. And I kind of think the pendulum swung a little bit too far on Gordon, and for a while he was being priced as if there was no chance he was getting back in, especially after this most recent suspension hit. To me, it's all about identifying patterns, and accurately identifying patterns. And I think a lot of the injury-prone labels that get tossed around, it's not good pattern recognition. Sometimes truly random events look like patterns. If you flip a coin 500 times in a row, you might get a streak of 6 or 8 consecutive heads. Just because random is random. Sometimes you're going to get streaks. But with suspension, I mean, there's a clear mechanism. The thing that caused him to get suspended the first time is also the thing that causes him to get suspended the second time, which is also the thing that causes him to get suspended the third time. So if there's a clear underlying mechanism, like there is with Gordon, obviously Gordon has some sort of problem, some sort of unhealthy relationship with substance abuse, and that's a heightened risk. Whereas, Rob Gronkowski tore his ACL, he had an infection in a broken arm. There's no clear mechanism. It's not like something that makes you more susceptible for arm infections also makes you more susceptible for torn ACLs. So it really depends on the price. I think that the market overrates injury risk, and at least prior to the most recent Gordon and Blackman suspensions, I thought it underrated suspension risk, but I think it's doing a pretty good job of pricing suspension risk right now.
Blackman is a really, really weird case that I've never seen before, where, I still have no idea what the Jaguars are going to do with him. He could come back and be the number one receiver there, or he could, come back and they could have him as, their third or fourth receiver, starting out. So I'll be really interested to see what goes on there. But one last thing that we talked about earlier in the show, what do you think about these young sort of quarterbacks? As you said, unless you think you can get top 5 production, you don't really value them. So, what do you think about a Ryan Tannehill or a Blake Bortles?
One thing I've seen in the past is I looked at elite quarterbacks and guys with top 10 seasons and typically what they looked like when they were young. And you hear a lot that there's a long curve at the quarterback position, but historically, at least, that's really not been the case. I think like 90 or 95% of quarterbacks who've had a top 10 season have been quarterbacks who've had a top 10 season within their first 2 years as a starter. You know, Tom Brady, you think that he was a slow starter? He was a top 10 quarterback his second year. Even guys like John Kitna, who you feel like came out of nowhere, they were journeymen for a while. John Kitna had a top 10 season early in his career. So if you've been starting for 2 years and you haven't really produced any startable fantasy value, that's kind of one where you're dead to me. There are going to be some exceptions, some guys who turn it around. But as a general, if we're 3 years in and we're still waiting to see something usable, I'd rather devote that roster space somewhere else, and I'd rather get what value I can. So someone like Tannehill, I know Tannehill really has a big following, and he might make me look silly for this. I get proven wrong an awful lot. It's all about playing the percentages and being right 55% of the time.
Yeah.
So with Tannehill, I'm not really that interested. With Bortles, I've seen guys have terrible rookie years and then still turn it around. So Bortles, I would still have on a 1-year leash. I'd give him one more shot, let Jacksonville roll him out there, kind of see what he does. If it's week 6 and he's still struggling, he's not looking dramatically improved, then I'm pulling the ripcord and getting what I can for Bortles.
So then what oh, go ahead, Nathan.
My thing with Bortles is that they're literally loading that offense with talent. They drafted Robinson and Lee. They signed Julius Thomas. Denard Robinson's emerging. If he can't succeed in that offense, really the only concern in that offense is the quarterback and the offensive line. So pretty much he's given the keys to succeed, and if he doesn't, then it's just not going to happen.
So then what do you think about a Bridgewater then? Because I'm really excited. I think we saw some major signs his rookie year. Like, do you think he has top 5 potential?
Yeah, and we did see some positive signs. I'm not quite as... I kind of feel like Draft Twitter got extremely self-congratulatory over Bridgewater. Because Draft Twitter just loved Teddy Bridgewater. And so I think a lot of his positive signs... I'm not going to say they get blown out of proportion, but people were looking for positive signs out of him.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of confirmation bias at play there. A lot of people saying, see how smart I am, I knew he was going to be great. And that's not to say that he wasn't great, but that's to say that the examples people are highlighting, they were pretty predisposed to start highlighting. Okay. So I like Bridgewater. I think he's got top 5 potential, but I'm not going to put him... You know, I see some dynasty rankings where he's quarterback 5, quarterback 6. I'm a little bit more tepid than that. I'm pumping the brakes a little bit. I might have him more at the quarterback 10 range.
Yeah, Nathan. I was talking about him before the show, and Nathan told me like he's what was he QB?
I think it's QB6, but he's definitely like QB6 or QB7. So
I didn't know he was going that high.
He's being drafted with no possible wiggle room. It's like, okay, if he's going to become this, he's this. But the thing with quarterbacks is that they last like a long time,
Mm-hmm.
Like Teddy Bridgewater, if he's a top 5 quarterback, then I have him until I'll be playing Dynasty for the next 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
That's kind of a large window, but you know what I mean? Like he's going to last a long time, and especially in like a super flex league, having a Teddy Bridgewater can just carry your team for years.
He could, yeah.
So what do you think about an Andrew Luck? Like, would you target him in a dynasty league, or is he going too high for you?
No, I'd absolutely target him. And I'm always more open to taking, in redraft especially, it's all about the running backs and the wide receivers. But in dynasty, I'm big on talent because talent translates to long careers. You had a guy like Rudy Johnson who was a very productive fantasy back, but he's not a great running back. He's not going to be playing forever. You can't really build around that long term. Whereas if you look at Peyton Manning's career, if you did a startup every draft of his career, Peyton Manning should have been a top 5 pick pretty much every year from 1999 until like 2007, 2008, 2009, just because he's crushing all the guys who are getting taken in the first round. He's lasting twice as long and he's producing value every year. So for a guy like Andrew Luck, I think he's super talented. I think he's super young. I'd happily spend a first-round startup pick on him. I don't really buy him at the 1.01 just because I think there are other comparably talented, comparably young players at slightly more premium positions. But after, I'd probably have him, like, let's say after Gronk, Julio, Odell Beckham are off the table, I'd really start considering Andrew Luck at the 1.04 to 1.06 range.
That's bold. I like Luck a lot, but for me, I only really target him and his price tag in leagues that highly value quarterbacks, whether it be in the scoring or it being a 16-team league or Superflex. In those leagues, I'm okay with paying up for Luck, even overpaying to an extent, but I don't think that his value in a 12-team league, I don't think lives up to his price tag.
I'm pretty agnostic to where he's going. Like, I like him at the end of the first round if I can get him there, or say early second. Like, I like that value, even if it's a start one quarterback league. As you said, there's quite a few receivers that I would probably value over him right now. But other than that and Gronk, he's right after that. So I start looking at him around the 1.7, 1.8 range.
So a quick list, real quick. Like, who would you definitely take over Luck?
I have my rankings at DLF, but I'll go Dez, Julio, OBJ, Evans, Gronk, Watkins, Antonio Brown, AJ Green, Demaryius Thomas, and that might be it.
I would have Green, Julio, Evans, Gronk, and who are the others? I wouldn't have Watkins over him, though, or Demaryius. I would cut out those two before I would take Luck before those two.
Yeah, I think I'm with Russell on that.
All right, well, we'll get a word from our sponsor real quick. Reality Sports Online is a powerful fantasy sports platform where owners get to build and manage their fantasy team like an NFL general manager. RSO features the revolutionary free agency auction room, which mimics NFL free agency, enabling fantasy owners to compete against each other, to negotiate with and sign the NFL's top talent to single or multi-year contracts. An intuitive algorithm acts as the player's agent, automatically valuing offers using the same factors used in real life: the total amount, per year average salary, total guarantee, and contract length. In addition to its revolutionary free agency software, RSO's League Manager has tons of other cool features, like in-season signs and cuts, multi-team up to 5, and future draft pick trades, franchise tag, injured reserve, automated contract and salary cap functionality, and much, much more. Test your general manager skills today by participating in a free mock free agency auction room at realitysportsonline.com. And you can use the code DUDES10 to get 10% off league entry fees. Once again, that's DUDES10, DUDEZ10, and you get 10% off your league entry fees for 2015. All right, guys, so anything else before we wrap up the show?
Yeah, I would like to note I am in an RSO league with Russell, and I think he still cries himself to sleep over how cheaply he let me get Gronk in that league.
Okay, and literally, like, Nathan, right after he got him, he goes in the chat and he's like, "Ooh, you should have kept going." And I was like, yeah. But then, like, after you said how high you were willing to go, which I obviously still shouldn't have let you get him for that cheap. I mean, this Adam was the first person that I ever saw, like, do an auction, but he went straight for it. Like, you got all your guys within the first, what, like you got all your main guys within the first 20 to 25 players. But it worked because everyone was so, like, ready to wait and, like, wait on the value that, like, it just opened up so much value, you know? And that was interesting to see a strategy like that.
That was actually my first auction, so I didn't even go in with that strategy. I just had my player values, and so I was bidding on people, and then, like, the bidding stopped, and I'm like, oh wait, okay, I guess I'm getting him for this.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things I learned, and I brought it to like other auctions now where I'm like, okay, it obviously didn't work for me in Kitchen Sink 3, but I just think that's an interesting strategy that people should think about in auction formats. Like, just go like there might be deals early on that you might not think about because everyone pretty much thinks the same way. They're like, oh, if I just wait, like I'll just get my guys at the end for cheap. But it doesn't always work that way. Like especially in sharper leagues, there's going to be people that wait with you, and then you have to risk getting bid up at the end. Like I got stuck bidding up the last what I considered elite receiver, and then I ended up paying like I don't know 25 million a year for AJ Green, which is a lot of your salary. So
I still think it was fair value, but obviously it's not like Gronk for 10 million a year.
yeah. So if you're gonna do an RSO league, which are fun, and I'm in two now, but just be aware of that and be quick to sort of see value early on is my advice.
Yeah, I'll be doing my first one with DLF next month or so, and I fully expect Russell and Jeff Barron to take me to the cleaners.
It's intense. It moves quickly. The rookie draft's like what, 30 seconds a pick or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's fun.
All right, well, Adam, thanks a lot for coming on today. Just let everyone know where they can find your writing and where they can find you, talk to you, and whatnot.
Yeah, for some reason they have decided that they want to publish my pieces over at Football Guys, so you can find it all there. That's footballguys.com. It's typically subscription, but during the off season they open everything up. Everything's free, including past year archives. And if you want to hit me up on Twitter, you know I really have nothing better to do with my life, so I always appreciate people checking in, and bugs my wife, but whatever. That's at Adam Harstad, last name Harstad, Harstad.
Awesome. And quick shout out to Flieger and Briggs who picked up our show, and now we're on iTunes. So I'm assuming if you type in Dynasty Dudes, we will come up there. And so there's the audio version for all you people that have been politely asking.
And everyone who's been politely asking, make sure you rate and leave a review. Tell me how awesome I am. Say how mediocre Russell is. And, thanks a lot for tuning in today, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Adam.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right, we'll see you guys later.